When a kid gets a concussion, the path back to normal can feel really complicated and, frankly, pretty stressful for everyone. For years, we've had this strict playbook we followed. But what if that playbook was based on an assumption that new science is now seriously challenging? So let's dive into this big shift in thinking and see what the latest research tells us about helping young people recover. This is the question, right? It's the one that parents, coaches, and the athletes themselves are constantly wrestling with. And man, it causes a ton of anxiety. Do you really have to be 100% back in the classroom before you can even think about picking up a basketball again? For a very long time, the answer was a simple, straightforward yes. And this slide, wow, it just perfectly lays out the whole shift. The old way, over on the left, was super rigid. It was sequential. You had to finish the school recovery track before you were even allowed to step onto the sports recovery track. But the new approach on the right, which is backed by all this new research, sees them as parallel paths you can actually walk down at the same time. Okay, so to really get why this change is such a big deal, we've got to look back at the old model. I mean, it wasn't created for no reason. There was a logic to it. And look, on the surface, that makes total sense, right? A kid's main job is being a student, so prioritizing their academic recovery feels like the most responsible thing you can do. The idea was to protect the brain's cognitive functions above everything else. But it turns out focusing only on that had some pretty serious downsides. Okay, check out this number. Even with this intense academics-first focus, a major study out of McMaster University found that 64% of kids still had problems at school during their recovery. This was a huge red flag. It told us that just keeping kids away from sports wasn't some kind of magic bullet for getting them back on track in the classroom. And yeah, the problems didn't stop there. This strict one-thing-at-a-time approach was leading to kids being socially isolated for long periods, away from their friends and their support systems. They were becoming physically deconditioned. And as the research clearly points out, this kind of isolation can seriously increase the risk for mental health challenges like depression and anxiety. So in our effort to protect the brain, we were actually kind of hurting the rest of the child. All right, so this is where the whole story really flips on its head. The study I just mentioned, which was published in Frontiers in Neurology, decided to track kids' recovery for both school and sports at the same time. And what they found was, honestly, a game changer. So what the researchers found was that the median time it took for a young person in their study to get fully back to school was 35 days. All right, 35 days. Got it? Keep that number in your head for a second. Okay, so what about a full return to sports and all their other activities? You'd think it would be way longer, right? But nope. The median time was just 38 days. That is incredibly close. It's almost the same amount of time. And this chart just lays it all out so clearly. Look how close those bars are. On the left, you've got the time to get back to school, and on the right, the time to get back to activity. They're practically running side by side. This data screamed that these two recovery paths don't happen one after the other. For most kids, they're happening at the same time. And this table here adds even more to the story. Turns out, getting back to school isn't some simple finish line. 64% of kids had problems, and a whopping 74% needed special accommodations, like more time on tests, just to cope. So this idea of waiting for some perfect, symptom-free return to the classroom before letting a kid do anything else, it just wasn't based in reality. So, okay, if the old way had all these problems and the recovery timelines are basically parallel, what do we do? Well, that brings us to this new way of thinking, the integrated approach. Think of this flowchart as the new roadmap for recovery. It's a guideline that shows how to move forward with both return to school, or RTS, and return to activity, RTA, together. The key is that the child's own symptoms are the guide. And here's the absolute key, right here in these first few steps. After a really brief rest period, kids can start light exercise at the same time they're getting ready to go back to school. Then, in stage 3, they're actually in school with some help, while also doing some light sport-specific activity. They're moving forward on both tracks at once. Now, hold on, this doesn't mean it's just a total free-for-all. There's a really important safety check built right into this new model. A child has to be fully back to their normal school routine before they can move on to the riskiest stages of their sport, like full contact practices and games. So we're still prioritizing academics, just in a much smarter, more balanced way. So Why does all this matter so much? Because making this shift from a sequential to an integrated mindset completely changes how we think about supporting a kid through their recovery. We're not just looking at the injury anymore, we're looking at the entire child. And you don't have to take my word for it. This quote is straight from the researchers themselves. The evidence shows that in those critical early stages of recovery, kids can and probably should be moving forward in both school and activity, as long as their symptoms are telling them it's okay. When you put it all together, the benefits of this new approach are just so clear. You're supporting the whole child, not just their brain. You're balancing their cognitive health with their physical and emotional well-being. You're getting them back with their friends, which cuts down on that dangerous social isolation. And you're giving them a recovery plan that's flexible and actually adapts to how they're feeling day to day. So we end up right back where we started. But now we know that school or sports is probably the wrong question. Based on this evidence, the real question we should be asking ourselves is this: isn't a balanced approach that supports a child's entire well-being the best and really the healthiest path forward?